education. We have some fantastic speakers today for you, or it's a workshop. So to hands-on learning, we have Adam Daystrup from Salt Lake Community College in Utah. We have Andrea Scott from Salt Lake Community College in Utah, and Lisa Young from Scottsdale Community College here in Maricopa. And I'll let them each do a little introduction about themselves and their experience with open education. Please take it away.
Do you want to do it in that order?
I'll just say, Lisa, I know you have, why don't you go in that order, because Lisa needs to go into a couple of things about professional growth.
Cool. Yeah, all right. So hello, everyone. My name is Adam Daystrup. I'm a professor in the Geosciences Department at Salt Lake Community College. I've been doing OER since 2014, starting with a Department of Labor grant, and I have created a few textbooks since then. And I will leave it at that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Scott, and I am with Salt Lake Community College. I'm the Operations Associate for Faculty Development and Educational Initiatives. I currently coordinate the OER initiative at Salt Lake Community College, and I also chair the Open SLCC Advisory Committee. My experience with OER started in 2013. I started at the beginning when the program first developed at the college. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everybody. I'm assuming, yes, you can hear me. Fantastic. I'm assuming we're recording.
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. My name is Lisa Young, and I am the faculty director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Scottsdale Community College. And I've been involved in OER since the early turn of the century, which is just so crazy to say. I started out with reusable learning objects and learning about Creative Commons licensing when Richard Barasniak first kind of started the whole movement, and in 2012 started really investigating OER for the Maricopa Community Colleges. And I also serve as the co-president of the Community College Consortium for Open Educational Resources, which is part of the Open Ed Global organization. So that's a little bit about us. So nice to meet you all. We have quite an exciting day planned to chat with you a bit about the world of open ed and some of the best and some of the worst practices for really getting OER moving on your campuses. And that's what we're going to chat about today with you all. So to that end, I'm going to figure out how to advance my slides. There we go. So for those of you who are with the Maricopa Community Colleges, we wanted to provide you information about faculty professional growth. Now, this is only for those faculty who, residential faculty who are part of the Maricopa Community Colleges. The first thing is that if you logged in with your name and your Maricopa email, and your name shows correctly on the participation list, then we're automatically taking your role. This workshop has been approved for 1.5 hours of faculty professional growth. And so your attendance and participation is being recorded in WebEx. You will need to complete the evaluation and assessment within 24 hours, indicating that you plan to apply for the FPG. The evaluation and assessment is one of our last slides. And so we will be providing you with that link so that you will have it. And then within 90 days, you need to complete the application for non-academic advancement and submit that to your college faculty professional growth rep. And that has to be done within 90 days. And you'll want to definitely include a print screen of the program flyer or event page from the conference workshop. So you'll definitely want to include that with that. So wanted to just give you the information on FPG for those of you who are with Maricopa and serve as residential faculty. We also have some recommended reading for you. And we have the philosophy and the philosophy and practices that are revolutionizing education and science by Rajiv Janjiani. And then we have the CARE framework by Lisa Petrides, Douglas Levin, and C. Edward Watson. And that framework is toward a sustainable OER ecosystem. And so wanted to make sure we were able to share that with you because these are some great resources for you as you look to really planning and implementing OER at your institutions or taking it to the next level. We also wanted to just touch on some work that Catherine Casserly has done. She is the former CEO of Creative Commons, and she's the program officer for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and they have been huge supporters of OER across the nation. And she has shared some central values of open education, and those central values are freedom, transparency, equity, access, inclusion, and collaboration. And these central values really serve as the foundation of the awesome work that you all are doing in OER. And we wanted to just, bring that to the forefront of your minds that these 6 items are really core values for OER. And finally, for those of you who are new to OER, while we could do an 1.5 to 3 hour workshop just on OER, we have a crash course for you. So I know you're super excited and you're like, oh, I didn't know I was getting a crash course in OER. But we have a crash course for you. And what are OER? OER are textbooks, they're videos, they're modules. They can be tests, they can be software, they can be any type of instructional asset that's used for teaching, learning, and research. But what the magic about OER is that they're shared under a Creative Commons license or an open license. Creative Commons is not the only license out there, open license out there, but they're shared under an open license. And with that open license, we get to do really cool stuff with that content. We can redistribute it, we can remix it and add to it and modify it. And I'm super excited because I'm going to be remixing some of Adam Dastrup's work for my new GIS class, and super excited to do that. We can reuse them, we can revise them, we can make them our own, we can specialize it for our particular students, disciplines, geographic regions, what have you. And what all this does is it transforms access. It provides affordability. It allows students to continue to be able to access materials instead of renting them and having to give them back. And what we're seeing as a result of this is that students are at least performing the same, if not better, in terms of student success metrics with the use of OER. So why wouldn't we do that? Thinking about, those core principles that we just talked about, those core values, and what we can do to really transform access to knowledge. So that is your crash course on OER. And I know that you're like, whoa, cool Medoodle. So with that, I think that I'm super excited to hear from Andrea and Adam a little bit more about Salt Lake Community College.
Yes, thank you. So I thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about the history of the program, the OER initiative at Salt Lake Community College, which we refer to as Open SLCC. But first, just to give a little background information about Salt Lake Community College might be helpful. Salt Lake Community College is a large public community college in Salt Lake County, Utah. And SLCC is the state's largest, most diverse student body, two-year college serving more than 60,000 students. Our open initiative began in 2013 in an effort to promote inclusivity and equitable access to learning materials, helping make college more affordable and accessible to all. Our former director, Dr. Jason Pickavance, the former director of faculty development and educational initiatives, built off of the grassroots, faculty-driven culture that was already in place. We had some faculty that were already creating OERs prior to the initiative coming along. And then he also employed a horizontal growth strategy by flipping entire gateway and general education courses open. In addition, the program encouraged organic growth through flexible development structure, including the development of guidelines allowing faculty or academic departments to opt in or out. One example of this would be we currently have a $5 OER fee that sustains the initiative. And that is an opt-in or opt-out option. So faculty or departments can choose whether they are applying that $5 fee. But it also, we hope it offers some flexibility within not creating a structure where faculty or departments are obligated to do that, but it's something more of a choice and there's some flexibility. So that's one example. Since 2013, OpenSLCC has grown to include 8,476 sections of OER courses with an estimated 15 million in student cost savings. Several of our faculty at SLCC have been interested in authoring textbooks. And so we currently, at this time, we house 18 SLCC faculty authored textbooks. And just recently in spring 2020, we launched an OpenSLCC Pressbooks to help better support faculty in those efforts. So thank you. I'll turn the time over to Adam.
Sorry, I was looking for the mute. I was just on a Zoom meeting, so trying to go between different types of platforms. Yeah, so I'll just keep mine simple because I have a slide further on down. But I've been doing OER again since 2014 because of a Department of Labor grant, and so my goal today is to be able to give voice to and provide Q&A, so to speak, to just what questions faculty might have if they are interested in integrating OER into their courses. Too often when we talk about OER, it comes across like about books, like it's a textbook thing. And reality is Creative Commons and OER is much more than that. It can be, you can integrate particular assignments instead. You could focus on the syllabi, having looking for openly licensed syllabi so you can see how other people are teaching the same course. It could be about open pedagogy, where you actually have your students help participate in the development of OER resources. It can just be taking something that's already existing, maybe an OpenStax book, and just integrating the textbook into your own course so the students don't have to pay for a textbook for your class. There's a whole bunch of ways that faculty can integrate OER into their courses, and it doesn't require necessarily you creating new stuff. It's more about getting involved and being part of the larger community where you can start to learn how to integrate OER into your own content and then start thinking about how you could then start paying it forward by maybe starting even small with do you have any assignments that you have created that you're willing to license openly as Creative Commons so that other faculty could do, either lab work or GIS or whatever that may be. But it's not always just about the textbook. It's much more than that. So other than that, I'm trying to think anything else with there. I do have 3 textbooks out there on Pressbooks. I could talk a little bit about Pressbooks or how is the best way, what's the best platform necessarily if you want to do OER. And further on down the road, I'm willing to speak to things regarding professional development or how do you get support from your administration. Sometimes people ask about how it can apply to rank and tenure and those kind of things. So as we move forward into more of a Q&A aspect of the panel, I'll address those more.
Thanks, Adam. As Cyan had mentioned, I'm with the Scottsdale Community College, one of the 10 Maricopa community colleges. And we started, our culture of sharing really started in the early 2000s. Many of you got to meet Alan Levine earlier this morning, and he was, he led our movement in regard to reusable learning objects, this idea of developing a repository where faculty could share different pieces of their content. And he developed a repository called the Maricopa Learning Exchange at the time. And that was really where Maricopa really started to develop this culture of sharing. And over the years, faculty were implementing actual OER. They were developing OER, they were sharing it, but there were pockets of innovation all over the Maricopa community colleges. And in 2012, we really looked at how can we leverage these pockets of innovation and the whole idea of what OER are, and Creative Commons licensing, and really develop a movement. So our our vice chancellor at the time, she had us put together a study what was happening at Maricopa, and from that we developed a paper, and we worked to develop a strategic plan, and she provided the funding. And so it was really you know, a combination of a grassroots effort with the support of our leadership to move OER forward at the Maricopa Community Colleges. And so we developed an OER steering team and all this. We did faculty engagement and all this stuff, which we're going to talk about more. We have had our program, the Maricopa Millions Project, which is in the process of being renamed right now. And officially since 2013, started in 2012. And some of our colleges like Scottsdale Community College and Mesa Community College have forms of Z degrees. Mesa has a Z degree, Maricopa has an A to Z degree. The A is for affordable and the Z is for zero textbook cost. And so we're really working to provide access. As Adam Leverett mentioned, we're leveraging open pedagogy to engage our students in the development of content and giving them a voice so that they can bring themselves into their content and the materials that they're using. But we want to hear from you. So we would like you, Stephen put the URL and the code in to the chat. And so we'd like you to go to menti.com. And I am going to go to menti.com with you. And we would like you to tell us about yourself. So you go to menti.com and you put this code in. That code is 6969501. And we would like you to tell us about yourself. So out of these roles, what role best describes you? Are you faculty? Are you a librarian? And we know that librarians can also be faculty. So a specialized faculty as a librarian or librarian. Are you an administrator? Is your main job OER? Tell us a little bit about yourselves, please. And we might have a few more people join us, so we'll give it another couple moments. And so it looks like we have primarily faculty. We have a few administrators, and a couple of you have your main job as OER, which is really exciting. So we're so glad that you were able to tell us a little bit about yourselves. We have another question for you. What is your experience with OER? Are you a newbie? Have you used other people's OER? Have you created OER for your own use? And have you created and shared OER? We'd love to know what your experience level is. So it looks like we have some new folks, some people who are new to OER. We also have, many of you have used others' OER, and some of you have created OER either for your own use, and some of you have shared it out, which, you know, is always kind of a little scary to share out that create your creation with others, but I think it's absolutely amazing when you hear from someone who's used your materials. It's really cool. And our next question is, just tell us a little bit about your institution. Is your institution just starting with OER? Do you have some faculty using and or creating OER, or do you have a comprehensive program? You've heard from Andrea, Adam, and I that we have pretty comprehensive programs where we're at, but that isn't necessarily the norm, and so we'd love to hear from you. All right, so some of you have institutions that are starting out. Some of you have comprehensive OER programs, and some of you are right in between. Andrea and Adam, any comments or thoughts on what we're hearing from our participants?
It sounds like we're in the sweet spot. Meaning,
we are.
So we have people who, like for me, most appear to be faculty. Most have some familiarity with it, and probably want to know how to maybe go a little further with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for participating in our little Mentimeter poll there. I'm going to switch back to our presentation. And the format for our talk today is going to be kind of question and answer. So we've put up some questions that we're going to answer, but as we're talking, think about for each slide, think about the questions that you have, because we want to answer your questions. So for each slide, we'll answer the question on the slide, and then the questions that those provoke from you, we want to hear from. So our first question that we're going to answer is, what is most important to consider when beginning an OER initiative? So I'm going to start by being quiet and let Andrea and Adam tackle this one first.
Do you have a preference, Andrea? Why don't you start first?
I can go ahead. Sorry, I lost my place and I wasn't able to unmute. So I think when considering an OER initiative, some things that I've learned in observation is you want to start by doing some research, and that can be, there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can either sign up for some listservs in the OER community, or you also want to, maybe you could reach out to other colleges who already have an OER program, for example, like us or Maricopa, and ask questions. Another resource that I found really helpful, and this is going to sound very funny, but I actually have found a lot of helpful information on Twitter. So a lot of sharing, I've noticed a lot of the OER community is on Twitter. And so just following people who are in the OER community and learning from them, that's also been helpful. In addition to research, I think identifying, well, I would say next, probably know your campus policies as well. So before going into developing an initiative, you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what kinds of policies may be able to jive with the OER initiative, and what may be a problem, and how you may be able to integrate those, or if it's an option, because you don't want to get so far started in the process and then realize that, oh, we have this policy here that's not flexible, and the college cannot support it. So that's something important to do. You also want to identify your campus stakeholders. So that may be various people. It could be, for example, when I think of Salt Lake Community College, we have lots of stakeholders. We have cabinet, we have leadership, we have advocates in student services, in our scheduling office, the library, faculty development and educational initiatives. We have our faculty champions. We have our student champions. So you kind of want to, once you've done your research, kind of start talking to people, and maybe perhaps there's people already at your institution that are doing some of this work already. It's possible. I've noticed with talking with other people, not realizing that they're working on something and that kind of thing. So that happens too. In addition to policies, I would say to set realistic goals. I think it's very, with OER, it's very easy to get excited and motivated and passionate about wanting to complete a project. And I get that. I'm very passionate about OER. However, I think you do want to be realistic. We have, and I'm going to use this as an example. We've had some faculty come into wanting to author a textbook, for example, and that's very exciting. But at the same time, depending on what type of textbook you're authoring, it could take up to 2 years to complete. So I guess, and that's maybe not necessarily an example for an initiative, but I would just say that probably setting small goals to begin with, there's nothing wrong with that. we started off with a small grant, $3,000 grant from Project Kaleidoscope. So it's okay. There's nothing wrong with starting small. And I've also heard from other initiatives, sometimes in talking with us, they feel like our program has scaled and that they feel intimidated to set little goals. And so I would say, don't be discouraged by that. Just start somewhere. So those are a few thoughts I have, and I feel like I've talked for a while, so I'll turn the time over to Adam or Lisa.
I can add just a little bit on that. In terms of stakeholders, a couple other stakeholders that we involved that I think is really critical, IT, and our instructional designers are also some key stakeholders that you would want to include. And then I think also something that's really important is that when you start really thinking about this, think about your faculty champions. If you have faculty who are already doing this in some way, shape, or form, definitely leverage their experiences. But also, one of the things that we were really very specific in doing was having people on our steering team who didn't necessarily believe in OER and didn't think that they wanted to go there. And that was great, having their perspectives on our conversations. You don't have everyone who agrees. Make sure you have some people who are going to be like, well, what about this? And also, as Andrea said, like having realistic goals, starting small. We're always talking about, like, doing things that are very specific, meaningful, and, are going to have somewhat of an impact, but that impact can be at the course level. So I'm going to, and also I think that one other thing is having those early adopters and those faculty champions is really important. But Andrea mentioned how important looking at policy is, but also having some people in leadership who support it as well. We were really fortunate when we started our steering team, the presidents were fighting to be on our steering team, which was awesome. Not literally fighting, but like everybody wanted to do it. And we were like, oh, how cool to be part of a project that, everyone wants to, have a part in it. Adam.
Yeah, so to kind of just rip off everyone here, OER can definitely be very exciting and very intimidating and very overwhelming and very underwhelming. Kind of just depends. And so, I agree with what Andrea said about setting real goals versus like lofty goals. I think it's very important to consider as a faculty member, what is your goal? I think most faculty who start looking at doing OER, they want to do it for their students. I think that tends to be the number one driving force. So if you're doing it for your students, then the question I would ask next is what the why? Like, what are you trying to do? And I think if it's usually the number one reason typically is to save students textbook, save them money. I know usually they say students spend up to an entire full-time semester of tuition just on textbooks every year. And so if you're trying to reduce that financial weight on students, and your goal is just to save students money, you may just want to start with just looking at what are the available resources already out there. So again, that would be like what Andrea is saying also about doing research. There's a whole bunch of great stuff that already exists out there through OpenStax, and there's a lot of other ones out there, BC Campus. I mean, there's a whole bunch of places you can start to find existing content. And there's always the thing where some people will say, well, I'm not sure, I looked at the book and it's not exactly everything I wanted. That's okay. So what if the book has 70 or 80% of what you would want to teach in your class? Have you ever had a textbook you used from a publisher that you use everything of anyways? So, but if you can use a textbook where the students don't have to pay for that, and then you have to kind of maybe somehow pick up the slack of what you want to teach for the other 30%, all of a sudden you start going down the road of maybe self-creating OER content, but not for the entire textbook, but just enough to cover what you want to make sure is covered in your class. Again, if you have a class that also has like maybe a lab book, or you have a lab as a course, look at how can you use OER to replace a lab manual, and so that's usually the first thing I would just say, to start small so you don't overwhelm yourself. And then I would honestly start just looking at then maybe looking at your existing content that you've already created as an instructor. And is there anything that you've already created that you could license as Creative Commons? You may already have stuff available that you could, like, maybe if you need to modify a few things, maybe you have to replace some of the images you have in an assignment or something to make sure you're not violating a copyright policy. But you might actually just start being able to like create little mini assignments that you can then post to the internet and tag it as licensed as Creative Commons or openly licensed, and all of a sudden you start contributing to the community in that way, in just small steps. Since I started in 2014, there really wasn't a lot yet at the time. And so I kind of started by just I'd already been teaching at the college for 7 years at that time. So I just started taking the 7 years worth of work I already had created and started making it into something that was, I wouldn't call it a textbook, but maybe almost like a study guide or a notes, almost instructor notes. And then that just slowly, those instructor notes that I gave to students over time just evolved more and more into a textbook. So that's where I would start with that is starting small can be big for your students. Starting small by saying, I'm going to just use an existing textbook will save, within that one decision alone can save your students, them choosing, gas and food over a textbook, right? I mean, especially in the world where 1 in 6, because of the pandemic, 1 in 6 people are going hungry at night. I mean, it's not uncommon to have students really struggling financially, and maybe they're using your school's pantry and they're trying to pay for these textbooks. So that's where I think if you start small, you can actually there's actually a big impact if you choose correctly. And I'll stop with that for now.
Yeah, I definitely, I think it's really important to realize the burden that textbooks costs can be on our students. I'm really glad that you brought that up. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention in terms specifically in regard to OER initiatives, and that's know what your boundaries are for what you would consider OER. So, there's a lot of, there's OER, and OER is specifically licensed under Creative Commons license. As I mentioned earlier, we have A to Z degrees, affordable to zero textbook cost degrees at Scottsdale. And we were very careful not to say that they are necessarily OER degrees. We would love to get to an OER degree that really, that everything in the course has a Creative Commons license, but we have amazing resources from our library that our students have access to for free, that we often need our students to have access to for our courses. And so we were very purposeful in our definition of our degrees for our initiatives, that we have affordable degrees that each of the materials are less than $40 or less. We have zero textbook costs, that they are free. And then we have our OER degrees, because it's A to Z, the O's in the center there, for our OER degrees. And so those wouldn't leverage things like our databases, our library databases that are copywritten, but freely available to our students. We want to hear from you all. Do you have any questions specifically regarding this? What's most important to consider when beginning an OER initiative? Because we have several questions that we're going to be chatting about, but if you have a question specific to this topic, please pop them in the chat so we can answer them.
And while people are popping that in, like one of the goals, I agree with you with the no to low cost degree versus a Z degree versus an OER. I mean, when we start saying an OER degree, the only people that really care about that are academics. Students want to see a low cost to no cost. They don't care if it's OER or not. And so, like, one of the things I do in our course catalog is my goal is, can a student complete my entire degree right now for $100 outside of tuition? In terms of like just textbooks and fees for the program, my program alone, if I can make it less than $100 for the entire program, not counting tuition, that's my goal. $100 or less for textbooks or whatever that may be for that program. So anyway,
I'm glad you shared that. We haven't gotten any questions on this slide, so we're going to move on to the next one. And our next one is, what support is there for OER planning? And I can start with answering this one a little bit. There's a lot of support for OER planning, especially at the institutional level. Consortium, the Community College Consortium for OER, cccoer.org, has a tremendous amount of resources available. Also, there are some, they have getting started planning guides. We've put together a lot of different materials that are freely available on our website. You can also, as an institution, become a member of CCCOER, and then you get even more support in developing in planning for your OER initiatives. Additionally, Spark, Student Pergs, and also have some fantastic resources available. And then when you join these listservs, like I'm specific to the CCC OER listserv, but there are several listservs out there. You can put questions out there, and the great thing, and I'm sure Andrea and Adam are going to agree with me, is that we really are an open community, and people just want to share what their institutions, what they've done. And so you never have to go very far. A quick email and you'll have a plethora of examples. So it might be that you want to develop an internal grant program, and you type it into the listserv, and boom, you have a whole bunch of sample grant applications and rubrics and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of resources out there for when you're looking at planning an initiative for OER, that you don't have to recreate the wheel. So many people have been there before. Just recently, an example of this is the Maricopa Community Colleges were the first college to be able to modify the student information system or registration system so that students could search specifically for low cost or no cost materials when they were selecting their schedule, because we had done focus groups and heard from the students that they were spending a crazy amount of time mining the schedule to try to find which courses had the least expensive textbooks. And so we developed in our Find a Class this filter so that students could search for, their English 101 class that was at a low cost or no cost, $40 or less. And some folks have some people on one of the listservs were just asking for this, and we were able to share how we did it and those kind of things. And that was something that we shared when we did it. And there are so many institutions doing that now, and it's fantastic. Andrea, do you have anything to add on this, or Adam?
I'd like to share a resource a planning resource, a sustainability planning resource that SUNY has, a OER field guide developed by RPG Group, and I can share. They have plenty of other resources for planning and sustainability planning. So I would like to share that resource for anybody who's interested in taking a look. But they have some assessment tools and a bunch of other great resources. The one particular when I was looking at the OER sustainability framework is geared around 3 common areas, which are infrastructure, resources, and culture. So I found that interesting, but wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm so glad that you were able to share that. Are there any questions from the audience on the support piece? Andrea was able to share a great resource. I can't go get the URL for the CCC OER listserv and put that in because I'm presenting, but I'll provide it at the end of the session for you, or perhaps one of our moderators could go in and grab that for us. Are there any questions from the audience? All right. Our next question is, how does OER work at the department or division level? Adam, do you want to kind of start with this about your experiences at Salt Lake, and then, we can talk about some other things at Maricopa?
Yeah, and so, for the faculty out there, this is where, feel free to start asking these questions of like, how do you, because I think this slide and the previous slide can be interpreted in different ways. So one way, I know when I've done these presentations like Scottsdale and a few others, when we start talking about support, some of the questions are, well, what administrative support do you have? Your associate dean or your chair, whoever that may, however your model is, what kind of support do you have with that? So like right now with the college, because OER is one of our major initiatives, and something that's quite popular across the board, it's easy for me to really have part of my teaching goals that I do every year for my job. The OER is a major component of it, and I can kind of control my service to the institution because of the load that OER may take for me. Because of the road I've gone down with OER, with creating textbooks, once you go down that road, you're never going to stop doing OER. You don't just like make a textbook and call it one and done. And so I have that administrative support. I don't get release time for it, but I do get to kind of control what some of that service I do for the institution, because of the college is quite aware that the work I'm doing is saving students money. But if you're in a world where maybe the OER is less institutionalized, then you have to be, again, a little more protective of your time and space. And you need to make sure that you are open with your administration about that you're doing this. And depending on the type of support you get, if they're very supportive of it, push it. So like, can you get a release time? Can you at least maybe release not serve on a committee or something, something to that extent. If you don't have that support from your administration to do this, then that's where you have to really then, again, going back to what Andrea is saying, is what are your goals? And sometimes less is more. If you don't have, that support, you have to really be very mindful of this, because OER you can let it take a large portion of your job outside of just the actual teaching of your classes, if you want. Now, with that said, one thing that we've been able to do too is once we've created these OER textbooks at the department level, the full-time faculty came to an agreement that we were going to make the OER textbooks required for all sections. So now all of our adjuncts are also teaching based off our OER textbook. And so that's something to consider as well, is how does this trickle down to your adjuncts, especially if you're like Salt Lake Community College, which is a heavily adjunct-driven institution. You have to be very mindful of that. And there's also, I would say, there's a catch-22 with going down OER, because one benefit to OER, one benefit to the publishers is that they provide you the textbook, they provide you a test bank, they provide you the PowerPoints, they provide you maybe with a teacher's resources thing. They are now going down the road of providing basically an LMS, right? So they've all, in many ways they're creating the assignments now for you, and there's all sorts of stuff. When you go down the OER world, you have kind of chosen to remove a lot of that. And so, in terms of like the supplemental resources for faculty and especially adjunct faculty becomes a little bit more of a burden because are you now going to not just create the book, but are you going to provide all the other resources that a publishing company was going to give you that you could have given to your adjuncts? So there is that bit of, what do you do about a test bank? What do you do about lectures and PowerPoints and those kind of things if you're using something that's not coming from a publisher? So I think there is that aspect that you have to consider as well. So with that, does anyone have any questions regarding any of that kind of stuff?
And when we're waiting on some questions, I might add that, at the department division level, as well as the institutional level, time is money. And, faculty time is really important, and faculty need to be compensated for the work that they do in OER, whether it's money or, as you mentioned, Adam, that release time or release from service, things like that, because it is definitely a challenge, and it takes a lot of time. The other thing is that, Adam, I think it's amazing that you all, for those classes that you're developing the OER for, that your adjuncts are able to use that. And so I think that's also a really great thing, and at the Maricopa colleges, each department kind of works differently in regard to their textbook adoptions. Some faculty in some departments, some faculty adopt their own textbooks, and others it's a departmental adoption. And so if it's a departmental adoption, really considering those OER textbooks when you're discussing what textbooks you're going to adopt, I think is really important. And we got a question from Cody Anderson. Cody asked, have you had any experiences of tension in a division with some faculty wanting OER and others not? So I'm gonna, Andrea, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So yes, we've had some challenges with that. So with our academic departments, and I'm not sure if it's like this at every institution, but the department chooses, some departments will choose the textbook for the faculty to use, and then other departments allow the faculty to choose the textbook individually. So with that being the case, at one department in particular, we did have that challenge with, and ended up doing is allowing some of those faculty to use their other resources. Well, I believe like 80% of the other faculty in the department use OERs. So it can be definitely a challenge. And as far as addressing that when you have a situation in an academic department where the faculty maybe don't have a choice, I'm not really sure I can speak to that piece of it, but I do know it's a challenge. Adam might be able to add something to that as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like in my department, we're a little smaller and we're all awesome. And so everyone was very interested in doing the OER, but we did do a slow transition into it. It wasn't straight course level. It was at first it was kind of like a line by line section level of which full-time faculty and even adjuncts were doing OER. There definitely is that aspect of academic freedom, right? So where faculty can choose, I don't know exactly how it works for everybody in every school, but at our institution, yeah, faculty could use academic freedom, say, no, I want to use this book. And so there is that component. There's a bit of a kind of like depends on the dynamics of your institution. Like at our school, we try not to have more than, at least in the 15 years I've been doing this stuff, we try not to have more than one or two textbook options for a class, any particular class. So maybe if a student goes to the bookstore, there's, back in the day, there might've been two different physical geography textbooks, depending on the instructor. So there's definitely that aspect of it. So, and that all you have to do with that is like, that's a conversation that has to happen between the departments and maybe even the administrator of that department. Again, however your model is, but yeah, there's definitely tension with that. I mean, there's still tension in our own institution regarding OER to some extent, and where some people don't want to use it. It's another thing that sometimes comes up with faculty tension with OERs. Some people will sometimes say, well, is the OER textbook as rigorous or peer-reviewed versus a publisher textbook? So yeah, there's definitely, there is always the different qualities of textbooks out there. So you do, again, going back to doing your research, looking at textbooks that are of value. But with that said, I would also argue that not all textbooks from publishers are actually accurate either. All you have to do is look at their different textbooks on how they may manipulate what an author said. And I know this is even more of an issue in like the K-12 system, but it still happens even in higher ed, where maybe climate change is discussed as human-driven and anthropogenic, that kind of stuff in one state, and in another state it's they'll soften that down a bit. You hear about that with history books, U.S. history. One textbook may say slaves and others may say workers, right? And so there's even that debate within the published textbook. So I have seen manipulation of content within textbooks just for the capitalism of selling the textbook. One of my slides I have in the future, I'll just kind of pre-state it a little bit, is that I think there's also value in saying that there's academic freedom in choosing OER. If you start having the ability to take content and making it your own, so you can revise it, remix it, revise it, whatever you want to say, where you start creating your own content, that in itself is like saying, I was hired because of my credentials. I was hired because I know my profession and my discipline, and I'm not going to be controlled by what a publisher says I should be teaching for this class. I'm going to teach what I think I want to teach in this class. And so I think there's a value added to say that there's academic freedom in OER as much as there is to say, well, is rigorous. So.
And I might just add, in regard to the question specifically about tension in departments, I did a workshop outside of my system a few years ago, and the tension in this department was over the look and feel of print materials versus that of OER. There were some faculty in the department that specifically felt that for color, having the color pages and such was a huge benefit to the students in teaching and learning. And so the department did split around this whole idea of how the textbooks looked. But when it came down to it, the students voted with their feet, and chose to, the color of the textbook didn't matter to them. And they voted, they enrolled in the classes that had the OER materials. And so it was just kind of, an interesting thing that does tend to happen. The students do vote with their feet. So our next question is actually a slide really looking at the faculty perspective using OER. So Adam, you're on again.
I realized I was on mute, sorry. Yeah, so this is the slide I should have made into a question. It should have been more like a Jeopardy game. But I'll just kind of talk through this real quick. Here's my thoughts on this from a faculty perspective. Again, why would faculty want to do this? I think there's two main reasons, and I would first want to lead out with the social justice aspect of it. And there's various levels of how you want to go about that topic. But for one, I think the number one reason is to just save students textbook, just save them costs. I'm not anti-textbook. I want to say that too. I'm not anti-publisher textbooks. They have a value added, and I tend to find personally, just from where I'm at, I find general education courses should definitely be looking at OER. And then once students really start getting into their own discipline, there might be a value of having them purchase particular textbook. So, but I think, you know, one of the number one reasons why we want to do this is to help the students, and it also makes it more equitable. Okay. Students have access to that textbook the first day of class. They're not waiting for their financial aid to come in or their paycheck to come in, or whatever they're trying to do to gain access. Because the longer, you know, the longer the student waits to have to get that textbook, the further behind they're getting in the course. So they get instant access to the content on day one. And then I have in here, it provides an opportunity for faculty to create inclusive content that allows students to see themselves within the textbook. And so what that means is, you know, how do you, you know, the problem with many textbooks that I see out there right now is that, especially in my discipline, it's very much white male. The scientists that are, you know, highlighted, the theories that are brought forth, and I think we're having a strong conversation in the OER community around inclusivity and equity and justice and all those important things. So when I designed my OER textbook, and not just my textbook, but just as a philosophical teaching philosophy within my course design and pedagogy, is to have students see themselves in the content. What I mean by that is I highlight scientists of color, transgender scientists, gay scientists, across the board, female scientists. You know, it's important for the students to see that they see themselves in the content, and they see that people like them have contributed to the discipline, and so OER, because it allows you to take a little more control and ownership of the content, you can actually start to modify the content to fit, especially fit the students in your own classroom. So the demographics in Utah might be quite different from Georgia, right? And so maybe I can tailor my OER a little differently for my students who are more Hispanic, Polynesian, Asian American. We do have a Black community, but you know, obviously Georgia is going to have a stronger Black community and a Cuban community and things like that. So there is that aspect of inclusiveness in the OER practice that's actually, I think, gaining a lot of momentum, and I'm very proud of that it's happening. Then there's the academic freedom aspect I've already brought forward. Faculty get to determine what they will teach in their classes rather than being delivered a textbook and the test bank and the PowerPoint and the LMS, mastering geography, right, or whatever, right? You kind of get locked in, and then the question then comes to some extent, if you're given a textbook and the lectures and the assignments and the test bank, I mean, are you needed? Like, you're really giving away a lot of your intellectual knowledge to another group of people. And so I do think it allows you to say, this is what I feel like is important in my courses. That's my again, my academic freedom. It also allows you to have those conversations within your departments. And then, you know, so maybe it's not you who determines the content being taught, but maybe your department does. But even then, your department becomes their own experts, and you were hired to be an expert. So it allows you to have that freedom, allows you to remix, you know, the whole 5 R's of OER. And then to me, OER is also a form of academic scholarship. At community colleges, you know, it's not so research driven, but I think there's a lot of us that are very interested in research and publication. And this is just another form of publication. And in order to do OER, you're going to be doing a lot of research, not just in OER practices, but on your content, because you're going to want to keep your textbook up to date. And so it provides to me, again, especially for community colleges, its own form of academic freedom and scholarship that I think we kind of sometimes miss out on as faculty in non-research institutions. So has anyone got questions regarding any of that kind of stuff? I was that good.
Sorry, I'm choking here. I'm okay. Great job, Adam. Thank you. Our next question is, how can OER integrate into other institutional initiatives? Andrea, do you want to start on this one?
Sure, yes, I'd be happy to. So I would say with integrating OER into, I would say take it step by step. I feel like our initiative has done that very well, taking little steps here and there. One way we did integrate, I would say, I'm trying to remember the date, but I think it was in 2016, maybe 2017. We did develop a advisory committee, and the Open SLCC Advisory Committee. And on that committee, we have different stakeholders from the different areas. So there is a position for the bookstore, the library, somebody from student services, and then we have different faculty that also sit on the board. And the purpose of the advisory committee is to help shape the initiative, the guidelines for the initiative as we continue to grow. And so much of our work has revolved around that. We also have a student who sits on the advisory committee as well. So I feel like that's one way that we have integrated OER into the institution of getting a different perspective. And I'll give you some time to talk as well. I don't want to talk too much.
I'm going to speak specifically to Scottsdale Community College well, actually, I'll first talk Maricopa and then Scottsdale. In Maricopa, OER is integrated into the strategic plan. There's actually an area in the strategic plan that specifically calls out OER. And they have institutionalized OER in a permanent position, which Cyan Proctor, who is one of our moderators today, serves in that role for 3 years. And so we've definitely done some work there. At Scottsdale Community College, we have, as part of our strategic planning, we have functional plans for each of our areas. And in our academic affairs functional plan, OER is also specifically written in as a student success initiative. Furthermore, in regard to some of the faculty work that's happening, we have student learning outcomes assessment, which is a requirement for our accreditation, and it gives us an opportunity to really dive in to looking at a number of our key institutional objectives and how our students are mastering them. And OER integrates for some of our departments specifically into our SLOA, our student learning outcome assessment work. And so it's pretty exciting to see how we can really look at OER as it as over time, and how it's really worked well with the institution and all of our different initiatives. So that's just a little bit about Maricopa and SCC. Questions regarding this slide, are folks out there?
While we see if anyone pops anything in there, I'll just add as well. OER can be its own initiative, and OER can provide support for other initiatives as well. So like at our institution, you know, from a community college perspective, we're looking at, in our strategic planning, dealing with issues of inclusivity, dealing with issues of retention, achievement gaps, various aspects like that. And in many ways, OER contributes to helping with the achievement gap. If done correctly, it can help with retention rates, if you can help with dropping the cost of tuition for students. It can help with inclusivity if you design the OER content to speak to students directly and help them feel as part of the discipline and the profession. And so it's not, so from the administrators out there, I guess to some extent I'm speaking to, is that it can also be a form of support for other college-wide initiatives or school initiatives or outcomes and assessment kind of stuff. Like I do find like, students are more, well, first off, sometimes you hear faculty or students complain that, yeah, I had to buy the book and we never used it. I never had to open it up. I don't know if I remember that being a narrative when I was going to college, right? Once you start actually creating OER, you're going to use it. You're not going to like just say, can you just do that on the side? And, no, if you're putting all this work in, you're going to be using the textbook. And so you can actually then also use, if you're required for your accreditation to deal with learning outcomes and assessment, OER can be a component of, does it actually help? Does it improve the assessment of your course? Does it help with the retention of your course? Does it help with the, what we call the do's versus the ABCs, the DEW versus the ABC? Does it help in any way with that kind of stuff? What we tend to find in most studies is that OER is almost nearly the same when it comes to helping with issues like grades and stuff. Like the OER doesn't necessarily make the grades better or less, but they're on par with traditional textbooks. So it's kind of speaking to the validity of the OER holds its own credibility with the textbook. So anyway, I'll just throw that in there for if anyone's got stuff.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about that is that OER does not do harm. We're seeing that it's at least equal to the textbook, or some students perform better. But what we're also finding from the research is that students are taking more credits than they normally would in some of the time. This year is a little bit different because of the dire situations that our students are in during the pandemic. But what we were seeing prior to the pandemic was that as students didn't have to pay for their textbooks, we had students choosing to enroll in more classes at a number of institutions across the nation, not just at my institution. So just some interesting things there. Oh yes.
I was saying, and the research also shows that just like high impact practices, OER tends to help more with marginalized groups. They tend to retain better in OER courses, again, because of the cost component. Just like high impact practices tend to really help marginalized groups in the retention of courses and programs. So.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to the next question. We have about 20 minutes left in our session here. So our next question is really, how do we effectively engage our students? And so, Andrea, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is one question that we asked with our initiative. We had this in 2018, we had grown quite a bit. Sorry, it's the slide back. You're fine. We had grown quite a bit as an initiative, but we started to realize as I was out advocating to students at different student events and finding that as I was talking to students, relatively few students were aware that we had these courses, these OER courses available. And not just that, but they didn't know where to find them. So, and I feel like I need to explain this a little bit. We do have, our courses are in our registration system, and they originally were tagged OER, but after time in speaking with the advisory committee and speaking with different student departments and getting student feedback, we found that the no cost, low cost tag fit more in line with our initiative and what we're trying to achieve. So, and also students understood more what no cost, low cost was than OER. So that's what we found. And so with this challenge in place of knowing that relatively few students were aware, we decided to partner with our campus internship program. And we developed a OER student outreach advocacy internship. And this was during 2018 that we started that in fall. And during the first year, we reached over 1,000 students, and we did 28 presentations together. Some of them actually we did together, and some she did herself. And then we did 2 collaborative events with other departments. And so what we did is the intern at that time, we were trying to explore these questions came up at these student events. And I noticed just through observation that the students were definitely more comfortable coming to talk to the students than me. So then I started to realize and it didn't matter where we were at, they would just hone in. It was like I wasn't even there, and which is fine. But then I started to think to myself, I think students would prefer to talk to other students about this. And so our student intern developed a survey that we used throughout the year and collected student information. And this is a convenience survey. And in that survey, one of the questions that we asked to a sample size of 223 SLCC students is the first question: how did you hear about the no cost, low cost textbook program at SLCC? And the response back we got was 48% said on the first day of class. So feeling like part of our department's role as advocacy, we're realizing that we needed to do a better job there. But let me continue through the statistics. So 31% never heard of it before today's event. So students coming to that student awareness event were hearing about it for the first time. And then 16% said through word of mouth, and then 5% of students said at a previous event. So that's kind of the statistics we got there. And then we also, I thought this was an interesting question, but our advocacy intern wanted to ask, how do students prefer to learn about no cost, low cost programs on campus? So we asked that question as well. And so we found 67% of students prefer to hear about or learn about no cost, low cost textbooks from other students. 24% would like to hear from their faculty. 5% said does not apply, and 4% had no answer. So that just kind of gives us just a little bit of a window. And again, this is a convenience survey. So, but still, it's data to look at and to consider. So I think for us, it really highlights that an effective strategy for outreach for students are students reaching out to students about OER and letting them know. And so I just want to kind of highlight in this picture, we did a community outreach event, and this is our student intern and another SLCC student that were doing some outreach for our campus. Also, I think too, having faculty champions are extremely helpful. With our advocacy intern, she was able to schedule time to go into different faculty classrooms, our faculty champions classrooms, and actually give a short 5-minute presentation about what OERs are and how to find them in the system. I think Maricopa, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Lisa, but don't you have it's right on your front page, isn't it? You have a search option where it's not it's not buried, your search option for finding courses, correct?
It used to be not buried.
Okay.
And so initially it was not buried, it was right there. And we had some feedback that it should be more where our online offerings and our hybrid offerings are, and not be right there at the top. And so now it's a little bit buried, but it is, but we still have it, and you need to provide that awareness.
Right. Yeah. So that is part of what our outreach is too, is our student intern has created a video a tutorial instructing students how to find courses in the registration system. And then also just creating flyers and then events. Our intern will be working with Open Education Week event coming up here, doing a student OER trivia. So anyway, that's kind of what we found with engaging students. Students, if you have the capacity, that's a lesson we learned. See if you can work with somebody on campus, maybe the internship program, and see if you can hire a student advocacy intern to help you promote that. I'm ready for the next slide.
Well, Andrea, we did get a question. So I know that for us, we actually have the words no cost, low cost to search for. Do you have an icon in your system, or is specifically the words no cost, low cost for your search?
So our search is no cost, low cost. So when you go into ours, we're in the banner system. So when you go into the banner system and you search under attribution, it's under no cost, low cost.
It's similar for students who wanted to look for a particular general education designation. It's the same kind of drop down menu. Like I want to find a physical science, or they could look for a no cost, something like that. Just my 2 quick cents on this as well with student engagement, again, from a faculty end, is that there's a concept called open pedagogy. And the idea there is having your students actually help create some of the OER content. So I have a friend, Melissa Hardy, she teaches biology, and she's actually having the students help her create a college biology 1 and a college biology 2 lab manual. And so what she has students do in their labs is they have to, like, one example I'm aware of is that they have to use these microscopes with these cameras, SLR cameras on them, and they have to take photographs of various things, whatever the lab's focusing on, and they have to do the lab assignment with it. But students are allowed to, if they're willing, to have their photography basically that they captured when they went out in the field. They collected a water sample, they brought it in, they analyzed it, they took photos of whatever microorganisms are in it, they do their analysis with it. But the students are then also able to contribute those images into the OER lab manual that she's designing. And there's other ways too. Like I could, in a human geography class, have students go out in the field, go outside, and if we're doing a section on religion, and I have them go do some kind of assignment about various religions or sacred sites, and they go document that, they photograph it, they do whatever. Maybe they interview somebody. Hypothetically, in an open pedagogy, I could have students and say, hey, if you're willing, would you want to have this contributed as part of the textbook moving forward? So when students are looking at various sacred sites, let's say, especially in Salt Lake, because we don't just have the LDS, we have Catholic, we have Hindu, Buddhist, that content can actually become part of the OER content of the course. And so there is an aspect when we say engage our students, they can also be part of the creating process. So that's all.
Absolutely. And one thing just to add, that at we do student engagement too at Maricopa, and but we've done it as faculty. I love the idea of having the students be the advocates, and so I think that we're going to steal your idea, Andrea. I hope there's an open license on that. But one thing that we do is we have OER student specialists. So we have hired our students to actually work with the faculty, kind of in an open pedagogy piece, where they're actually developing the OER materials with the faculty. The faculty are serving as subject matter experts, and then we have our instructional designers and librarians helping the students and the faculty, but they work as a team. And that's a role that we were able to borrow from College of the Canyons. And so just another way that we're able to engage our students. We do have a question. Cody asked the question, a speaker last week mentioned that there is plenty of OER content out there, but the big missing piece is central organization and curation. What do you all envision for OER organization at a regional, national, and international scale? Wicked awesome question, Cody. Who wants to take that one first?
That's a great question. There's definitely there's larger groups. There's like BC Campus, which is in British Columbia, that helps kind of organize stuff. There's OpenStax. There's also, like we mentioned, there's the global education, Open Global Education group. There's the CCOER, whatever it's called, group. Part of the part of the strength of OER is its grassroots. And so that's where I wouldn't call it tension at all, but there's definitely that, how do we make sure that we make content that is rigorous, academically valid, even peer reviewed, there's definitely all that stuff that we want to make sure we have that empowers the credibility of open content. But at the same time, I do think there's also a big, one of the great successes of Slick was that it was grassroots. It wasn't a top-down initiative. And I find with both, value in both sides of that question. So hopefully I'm answering it right. I don't think there'll ever be a central organization. I don't think the culture, that's just not how it works. There's regional groups, there's a national group, there's international, even in the international, it's broken into regions of the country or the world, like an African version of OER and an Asian and a European and stuff. And the thing is like every region around the world has their own issues with OER, like not issues in a bad way, but like, in Europe, so much of their education system is already subsidized. So OER in Europe is a very different conversation than OER in the United States. And OER at a four-year institution is a very different conversation than OER at a community college. And so OER, one of its strengths is its flexibility. And so, I don't know, I'll leave it at that, see if Lisa or Andrea have anything to add to that.
I'll add a little bit to that. About maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was at the OE Global Conference in Poland, and we had a discussion about how there's no way, like there's ISBN numbers, and ISBN numbers are across the world really in terms of publishing, and we're able to find and catalog those materials, but we don't necessarily have a way to find and catalog our OER materials right now. We don't have the metadata, we don't have standard metadata, we don't have any of those things that we can tag the materials so they can be easily searchable. We don't have interoperability standards so that we can stack something that's in ModPress and something that's on a website and something that's a PDF and really remix them without a massive amount of formatting and pulling it together. But I can tell you that there is some work being done in regard to interoperability standards and creating those standards on an international level to be able to have that. And then there have been a lot of discussions about how we can catalog existing OER with metadata. It's a big thing because, as Adam mentioned, this has been a grassroots effort. And as we look at that, how do we go back in time and, get these things so that they can all speak to each other? But there are grants where people are working on this. There are big groups of people who are working on this. And I don't think it's going to be something that's answered in a year. It's one of those big problems that we have to try to tackle. But I can tell you that we've been in discussions for several years at an international level, and that work is being done to do that. We have about 6 minutes left. Adam or Andrea, did you want to add anything in response to that question from
I
Cody?
think you two covered it pretty much. I would just add that I'll build off of what Adam said on you, that I feel like the culture is very much a flexible culture. And so coming together, there's a lot that comes around that with organization and centralizing. So I will just sum it up with what you said, and I don't really have anything else to add to it.
Well, one thing I got to do this year is last year I won the Global Global Education Award, whatever it's called. And so this year I got to be a judge. And this year, what was very fascinating to me was several of the people the groups that applied were actually not OER content. They were designing databases of how to be able to search for OER. I think that's probably the biggest messiness, and that's not a negative thing, but it's the messiness of OER, is that there is a lot of stuff out there. How do you find it? And how do you find good stuff, good quality stuff? And so some of the proposals were people making actually databases, not that are OER books, but it was like, how do you create ways to find this stuff better? There's different search engines, so to speak, that are out there that focus on finding OER, like Merlot is one. There's a couple, I don't know if maybe like at some point, I don't know if Lisa, in the notes you could provide I don't know if you're sending an email follow-up on this, but like maybe some of those repositories that people can find stuff on. But anyway, yeah, Merlot, and yeah, it's not just a great wine, but it's a decent search engine too.
Excellent. We only have a couple more minutes. I'm going to jump to the slide about faculty professional growth. When we do that, if anyone has any additional questions, we had some other things that we wanted to share with you, but we're not going to be able to. We do, there are a lot of conferences, national and global conferences that are available, and we've talked about some of these organizations. And some initiatives, like there's the Free the Textbook initiative, which is available. One thing to note, Open Ed Week is March 1st through the 5th. So definitely you can check that out. You can type in Open Education Week 2021 and there's an international program. But what's a very critical thing for those of you who are from Maricopa and are applying for faculty professional growth, you have 24 hours to complete the evaluation and assessment. And so please go ahead and Stephen, if you can put this link in the chat so that people can do the evaluation and assessment. And then and then after you complete the evaluation and assessment, remember that you have 90 days to fill out the additional paperwork. Cyan, there's a question about the badge. Do you have any information about the badge? I don't have any information about that.
I do not. Matthew will be able to answer
Hi,
that.
this is Matthew. I can actually answer that question. First of all, I want to say thank you to Adam and Andrea and Lisa for running this workshop. And those of you who are interested in earning the OER practitioner certification for all 7 workshops, this is the 7th one in the series. And so if this is, the 7th one that you've attended separately or whatever, then you will be getting a OER Open Maricopa OER certification. Once I get all the attendance and everything like that worked out, I'll be reaching out to everyone who actually has earned that badge. And if you are missing one or more of the workshops, we will be offering in the future some version of professional development that will fit in as well with the certification plan. So it's not like if you're missing like 2 workshops that you're going to be out of luck completely. We'll just keep an eye out for other opportunities in the future. And feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat if you have specific questions about your OER practitioner certification.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us for this very informative webinar. Is there anything else anybody would like to say?
Just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us. And thank you, Adam and Andrea, for joining us.
It's my honor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us.
All right, to all of our participants, thank you for joining and have a fantastic weekend. We do have another webinar. We do have another set of workshops at 2 o'clock that we hope you will join in on.